Hello, Anatomy. Welcome to part one. It will be a two-part video series on chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a decently lengthy chapter, so we're going to divide this into two videos. Again, this is part one. So chapter 4 is called Skin and Body Membranes. So the function of body membranes, so obviously to cover body surfaces, think of your skin. Also to line body cavities. So inside your thoracic cavity, like your chest or your abdominal cavity, the inside surfaces of those cavities are lined by membranes. Also to form protective sheets around organs. So think of like a membrane around your heart or around your kidneys. Those are all lined with types of membranes. So membranes aren't just talking about your skin, they're also talking about things that line your abdominal cavities, or I'm sorry, your body cavities rather, like your abdomen, and also that line your organs. You classify body membranes by their tissue types. So the main types of body membranes, you divide them into two categories: epithelial membranes and connective tissue membranes. Epithelial membranes, and this gets pretty detailed. We're going to go through each of these one at a time. Right now, let's just list what they are. Epithelial membranes, there's three types. There's cutaneous membranes, which is your skin. There are mucous membranes, like what line your nose or your mouth. There are serous membranes. The second type are called connective tissue membranes, and the only example that we're going to go through are called synovial membranes. So under epithelial, there's cutaneous, mucous, and serous. Under connective, there is synovial. Okay, so let's start with cutaneous membranes. So these are called dry membranes. This is mainly talking about your skin. This is the outermost protective boundary of your body. Obviously, it's very important because it keeps things out that should be out, keeps things in that should be in. It's waterproof. You can swim in a pool for hours, and your skin doesn't fill with water, you don't get bloated. The superficial epidermis, the outside, is composed of stratified squamous cells, like we said back in chapter 3, and they're keratinized. Keratin is sort of a thick or very dense protein product that helps keep your skin nice and waterproof, helps keep it nice and firm. The underlying tissues underneath your epidermis or the cutaneous membranes is called dermis, which is mainly made of dense connective tissue. We discussed that briefly back in chapter 3. The different types of dense connective tissues were ligaments, tendons, and then your dermis underneath your epidermis. So mucous membranes, so basically any body cavity that opens up to the exterior. So think like your eyes, think your nose, think your mouth, think your urinary openings, your reproductive openings. Those are all body cavities that open to the outside. They're lined with what are called mucous membranes. Mucous membranes, like the ones in your mouth, are usually stratified squamous, so many layers of flat tiles. The ones that line your digestive tract are usually simple columnar, so a single row of column-shaped cells. The tissue underneath on which they lie is called lamina propria, and it's a kind of loose connective tissue. Think back to chapter 3. And oftentimes mucous membranes, not every mucous membrane produces mucus. Some of them do, though. Ones in your digestive system do produce mucus. These membranes are usually adapted for secreting stuff, like maybe mucus, or for absorbing things into the body. This diagram from the book kind of shows, you have mucous membranes that line your nose, your mouth, your lungs, your digestive system. So the third type are called serous membranes, and this is oftentimes the hardest for kids to understand. So first off, these are usually composed of a simple layer of squamous epithelium. So they're very, very thin. Usually underneath them is a layer of areolar connective tissue. Again, we discussed that back in chapter 3. So these line body cavities that are closed to the exterior of the body. So just to review, cutaneous were on the outside, mucous were on the inside, but cavities that open to the outside, and serous are ones on the inside that do not open to the outside. So think about like your heart. Let's use your heart as an example before we go into visceral and parietal. So you have a heart, right? Picture this is your heart. There's a membrane that's around your heart, right? It's called the pericardium, where your heart is, suspended inside your thoracic cavity, inside your chest. So your heart is making contact to the inside of your chest cavity, right? Which is also lined with a membrane, all right? These membranes, the ones that line organs or that line the inside of, say, your chest cavity or your abdominal cavity, are called serous membranes. All right, they occur in pairs. All right, so if you think about your heart, the membrane, that's actually touching the heart, that's called a visceral membrane. Visceral serous membranes are the ones that actually touch the organ. Parietal membranes, which are also serous membranes, parietal ones are the ones that actually touch the inside lining of the body cavity, so your thoracic cavity or your abdominal cavity. So here's my heart. I have a membrane around it. The part that's touching the heart is visceral. The part that's touching my internal body cavity is parietal. Usually between the two is there's not much space between the two, but usually between the two, there's a very thin layer of serous fluid. It's fluid that's produced by the serous membranes. And that's because, like, imagine your heart beating. If your heart was creating, friction against the inside lining of your body, that would be bad. So you want to keep it nice and lubricated with serous fluid, between the visceral and the parietal layers. Your book goes through this analogy of how you can kind of picture this. So what's happening here is they've taken a balloon that was like half blown up, and they've put a person's fist into the balloon. Now the balloon was one membrane. It was a balloon. When you put your fist inside it, you kind of divide it into two. There's the membrane that's actually touching your fist, that's lining your fist. Then there's the outside of the membrane. This is what serous membranes are like. In this example, between the two is air, the air of the balloon. But in your body, between the two would be serous fluid. It would be a very, very, very thin layer of fluid. Okay. Examples of serous membranes. So the peritoneum is the one that lines your abdominal cavity. So the one that's lining your stomach, your intestines, and then the inside wall of your abdomen. The pleura are the ones that line the lungs. And the pericardium, I mentioned this earlier, is the one that lines the heart. This just shows an example. This is the pleura of the lungs. The viscerals on the membrane that touches the lungs on the inside. The parietal is the one that's touching the inside of your thoracic or your chest cavity. Okay, so those were the three types of epithelial membranes. For synovial, this doesn't have any epithelial tissues. This is all connective tissue. When you see synovial, you should think joints, like your knee or your elbow, because these are the membranes that line your joints. They also secrete a lubricating fluid to keep your joints nice and prevent them from having friction, to keep them nice and lubricated. There's also oftentimes fibrous capsules called bursa that can be inside joints, and synovial membranes line those two. That's all we're really going to say about synovial membranes. You just need to know what they are. And an example, again, these are membranes that line your joints. Okay, so let's go through some things about your actual skin. So your integumentary system, we said that's your skin. It's your skin. It also includes skin derivatives, things like sweat glands, oil glands, hair, and nails. Skin derivatives we're going to do in part 2, the second video for chapter 4. We're going to end this video with some information about the skin. So skin functions, this is pretty simple. So it's to prevent, mechanical damage like tearing or bruising or bumps, chemical damage, acids, bases, things that get on your skin. Bacterial damage keeps bacteria out. Ultraviolet radiation protects you from that, to an extent, right? Thermal damage, heat versus cold damage. Desiccation is a fancy word for drying out. Your skin's waterproof, so it helps keep you from dehydrating to an extent. It aids in body heat loss or heat retention. This would be, you shiver if it's cold, you sweat if it's hot. Aids in excretion of urea and uric acid. Your skin actually does secrete urea and uric acid, which are waste products. Your skin also synthesizes vitamin D, which is a vitamin, you go outside, if sunlight hits your skin, it produces vitamin D. Vitamin D helps your tissues absorb calcium. So without vitamin D, your body, you can drink all the calcium you want, but your body isn't actually absorbing it into your cells. So your skin does lots of very important things. So in terms of the structure, let me come back to the slide for a second. So this image we're going to come back to several times. If you look at this image, you have an epidermis, which is the outer layer. Then you have this thick layer called the dermis. The dermis has two parts. There's the papillary layer and the reticular layer. And the part underneath your skin's called the hypodermis, which is mainly just fat, okay? So going back, so the outer layer is your epidermis. It's mainly stratified squamous epithelial cells. We've discussed this many times. It's cornified or keratinized, which just means those cells that produce keratin to make it waterproof, to make it a nice supportive barrier. Avascular means it doesn't have blood vessels. The epidermis, is mainly dead cells. There isn't a vascular supply. And most of the cells in the epidermis are called keratinocytes, which are cells that produce keratin to help keep your skin waterproof. The dermis underneath is mainly composed of dense connective tissue, like going back to chapter 3. Here again, you can see, here's the epidermis. It's thinner. The dermis is thicker. The papillary layer, the reticular layer, we're going to go through all this in a minute. And underneath is the hypodermis. Inside the reticular layer, you can have sweat glands, hair follicles, oil glands, sensory nerves, heat receptors, touch receptors, things like that. Again, the area under the dermis is called the hypodermis. It's not technically part of the skin. It has two main functions. It helps anchor the dermis to the underlying organs. It's composed largely of adipose or fat tissue, which can be for cushioning. It can be for storing excess energy. Okay, so we're going to go through the layers of the epidermis. So let me go back really quick. So right now we're on the epidermis right here, this top little part. There are 5 main layers of the epidermis. We're going to start with the deepest and work our way up to the top. The stratum basale is the deepest layer. It's also called the stratum germinativum. That looks like a fancy way of saying germinate, because these are the cells that are actually going through mitosis, that are going through cell division. And when these cells divide, they kind of get pushed upward to the upper layers of your epidermis. Again, this is the lowest, is the one right next to the dermis. The wavy border between the stratum basale and the dermis is what holds the two together. These are cells going through mitosis. And again, they get pushed upwards as they go through mitosis. The next 2 layers working their way up are called the stratum spinosum and the stratum granulosum. These 2 we're not really going to talk about very much. You just really need to know, the proper order of the layers. One thing I should point out, so the epidermis and the dermis they attach to each other very well. They can become separated. For example, if you have like a blister on your hand or on your foot, maybe from a shoe that doesn't fit quite right, that wear and tear can cause the dermis and the epidermis to separate, and fluid can get in that space, and that causes a blister. Blisters can be pretty painful. So going further up, the stratum lucidum. The stratum lucidum isn't found everywhere. It's only found like on the bottoms of your feet or the palms of your hand, areas where your skin is thick and hairless. The top layer is called the stratum corneum. This is the outermost layer. These are cells that have lots of keratin. They're dead. When I look at you, I'm looking at a collection of dead cells, because the outermost layer of your skin, those cells are dead. They're sort of like shingles. They prevent water loss, and they're obviously that nice firm protective layer of your skin. So just to review, the layers in order from bottom to outward. Okay, so from deep to superficial is the stratum basale, the stratum spinosum, the stratum granulosum, the stratum lucidum, which isn't always there, and then the stratum corneum. I know I'll skip a slide. Let me just show you this picture. So this reviews that. So here's the dermis. You have nerves. In your dermis, again, there's nerves. There's melanocytes that produce melanin. Then here we get to the stratum basale, spinosum, granulosum. This one that doesn't show lucidum, and then corneum. In the spinosum, you can have keratinocytes, the cells that produce keratin. You can have these epidermal dendritic cells. These are cells that kind of monitor your skin for any infections. Going back, so melanin, I kind of just said this, melanin is produced by cells called melanocytes. Melanin can vary. This is what gives you your skin color. It can vary from yellow to black to brown, different combinations of the 3. And obviously the amount of melanin is based upon your, your genetics, and also upon your exposure to sunlight. Getting a suntan, we'll discuss this more later, but that's the skin's reaction to sunlight causes it to produce more melanin. It's a way of protecting the skin against UV radiation damage, protecting really the DNA inside those cells. Most melanocytes, again, excuse me, are in the stratum basale, that bottom layer. Again, this image we've already looked at. So the dermis, let me go back really quick just to review something. So remember, the dermis had this papillary layer and it had this reticular layer. Papillary layer is pretty thin, the reticular layer is thicker. Going back to where we were. So the papillary layer is that upper thin layer. It has these projections called dermal papillae, and they kind of have these like loop things. Sometimes they contain capillaries. That's part of your blood flow. They can contain pain receptors, heat receptors, touch receptors. Going deep to that is called the reticular layer. This is your deepest skin layer. This is where your blood vessels are, sweat and oil glands, and deep pressure receptors that allow you, to detect deep pressure or force. Those are in the reticular layer of your dermis. Overall structure, so the dermis, you have collagen and elastic fibers. The collagen makes the skin firm, and the elastic fibers give your skin its stretchiness. As you get older, your dermis loses those collagen fibers and those elastic fibers, and that, in combination with the fact that usually as you get older, the layer of fat in the hypodermis under your skin starts to thin out or go away, is why you get wrinkles. Your skin tends to sag. Your skin loses that elasticity to it because you're losing the collagen and the elastic fibers. Having that layer of fat under your skin makes your skin look healthy, makes it look filled out. When you lose that, your skin gets wrinkly and saggy. Blood vessels in the dermis also play a role in temperature regulation. Again, you get too hot, you sweat. You get too cold, you shiver. Your blood vessels get, if you're too hot, your blood vessels can dilate, can expand, which is a way of the blood vessels losing heat to the outside environment. If you get too cold, your blood vessels can constrict or can become narrower, which is a way of conserving heat inside your body. Here we see another picture. This is a cross section. Here's the dermis. Here's the papillary layer here's the epidermis. Here's the papillary layer of the dermis. You can see this like loops. And the reticular layer of the dermis underneath would be the hypodermis under your skin. Things to determine your skin color: melanin, we've discussed, yellow, brown, or black, different combinations. Carotene is a pigment found in some vegetables like carrots, which can give you sort of an orange-yellow tinge to your skin. Hemoglobin is what's found in your blood. Hemoglobin is what carries oxygen through your body. Hemoglobin looks red. It can give you, if you blush, that's from hemoglobin. The oxygen content determines the extent of the redness. So at this point, someone usually brings up in class, I was taught in kindergarten that, when blood doesn't have oxygen, it's blue. When it has oxygen, it's red. And I want to clear up this misconception now. We might discuss this actually in person in class, but blood is never blue. All right, there are some teachers, usually in like elementary school, that are teaching little kids that blood that doesn't have oxygen, so blood in your veins is blue, and that blood that has oxygen is red. Blood is never, ever, ever blue. All right. In humans, blood is always some shade of red. The reason why your veins look blue under your skin, we'll discuss in a minute, but blood is never, ever, 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 ever blue. This slide that I got, this is taken from a blood bank. A phlebotomist is someone who is trained to take blood. And the color of blood, can vary. The top is blood so the top is venous blood that's really lacking oxygen, blood that's in your veins. And as we go down, the bottom is arterial blood that just came from the heart or from the lungs, blood that has tons of oxygen. Blood that is highly oxygenated is this bright red. Blood that is lacking oxygen, it's almost approaching purple. If you, like when you give blood at a blood bank or at the doctor's office, your blood tends to look kind of like this darker color. If you've ever been to a blood bank and you see like the blood in the bag, that's blood that came from a vein. That's venous blood. It's not blue, people. It's this dark, this deep color of red. borderline purple. If I took blood from your aorta, which, you know, that would be a bad idea, because if I cut your aorta, you're going to be dead pretty soon. You squirt blood across the room. It's going to be this bright red. When you get a cut, like if you get a finger prick or a paper cut, your blood's kind of in the middle. That's capillary blood. Capillaries are where connect arteries and veins. Capillaries are where gas exchange happens, or nutrient exchange happens between your blood and the tissues. So that's kind of like the middle. So blood came from my lungs to my heart, got pumped. It was bright red. As it goes through your body, it's losing oxygen to your tissues, which is what's supposed to happen. And you get capillary blood, which is kind of this shade. When blood leaves your capillaries and goes into your veins, it's oxygen starved, and it's this color. Okay. So this is venous blood. This is capillary blood. This is arterial blood. Blood is never blue. Whoever taught you that, please go tell them to stop teaching that, because it is wrong, and I have to undo this every year. Okay, changes in skin color. Erythema is when your skin looks red, fever, allergy, blushing because you're embarrassed. Pallor or blanching is when you get pale. If you lose your color, maybe you're scared. Anemia, having low iron content of your blood, low hemoglobin, low blood pressure. Jaundice is a liver condition with, it's when your skin of your eyes look yellow. Some babies are born with jaundice. Bruises, a hematoma is a fancy word for a bruise. That's when blood is leaving your blood vessels because you've ruptured them or for whatever reason, and that causes a bruise. Okay, so we're gonna stop there. That's the first half of chapter 4. That was plenty for one video. Hope that was helpful, and I will see you guys next time.